Hi, Gouger. For those who haven't met me, I'm Monica Neel, the director of the Student Counseling Center here at Gouger College. I hope everyone is taking care of themselves, checking in with friends and family, and finding ways to develop a routine in this era of physical distancing. Our office has created a YouTube channel to help foster connection, reduce feelings of isolation, and provide some helpful coping strategies, as well as offer tips to help us all navigate this current period of adjustment. Today, I wanted to share with you the work of one of my favorite psychologists and researchers, Kristen Neff, a pioneer in the area of self-compassion. The content is hers, but I hoped that it would be nice to hear it delivered in a familiar voice and by a familiar face. So this idea of self-compassion is really no different than having compassion for others. We must first notice that someone is in pain or suffering. We offer understanding and kindness rather than judgment. And unlike pity, it means that we realize that suffering and failure and imperfection are all part of the shared human experience. Similarly, self-compassion involves acting this way toward ourselves when we're having a difficult time, when we're experiencing failure, or when we're noticing something that we might not like about ourselves. And in her research, Neff outlines three main components to self-compassion. The first being self-compassion itself, another being calming humanity, and another being the concept of mindfulness. So if we look at this first concept of self-compassion more deeply, it's sometimes easier to say what it's not. And self-compassion is not the same as self-judgment, which is really, unfortunately, pretty typical in American culture. With self-judgment, people are often very hard on themselves. We might notice something that we want to change and tend to shame ourselves into action, thinking that this form of tough love is more effective. But we actually know that leading with shame in this manner inevitably backfires because in efforts to avoid the feelings of shame and self-judgment, it becomes so aversive and so overwhelming that we might just avoid that issue in that realm of our life as a whole. In contrast, self-compassion is fueled by one's internal motivation for growth and change and provides the safety needed for us to see ourselves clearly without fear of self-criticism. A self-compassionate stance is one that leads with a warmth and an understanding toward ourselves when we suffer, when we fail, or when we feel inadequate, rather than ignoring our pain or beating ourselves up with self-criticism. Self-compassionate people tend to recognize that being imperfect and failing and experiencing life difficulties is inevitable. So we tend to be gentle with ourselves in these stances. And when we're confronted with painful experiences, rather than getting angry when life falls short, we're gentle. Another hallmark of self-compassion is the concept of common humanity. And Neff pits this concept in contrast to isolation. For me, this one has been super relevant during our COVID-19 era of physical distancing because the physical distance can really easily reinforce the idea of feeling alone and being over-focused on one's personal experience and personal suffering. In times like this, it's particularly easy to feel a pervasive sense of isolation, as if I am the only person that's suffering. When we lean into the concept of common humanity, however, and recognize that all humans suffer, we acknowledge that all of us are mortal, vulnerable, and imperfect. And self-compassion involves recognizing that suffering and even personal inadequacy are all part of a shared human experience, something that we all go through rather than something that happens to me alone. In this acknowledgement, there's a greater sense of actually feeling connected to other people. And there's a shared pain in that common human experience. Another concept that's really essential when exploring the realm of self-compassion is mindfulness. And this is a word we hear about a lot today, but in Neff's description, mindfulness is taking a non-judgmental, receptive mind state in which we observe our thoughts and feelings as they are without trying to suppress them, without trying to deny them. We can't ignore our pain and feel compassion for ourselves at the same time. Similarly, mindfulness requires that we not be over-identified with thoughts and feelings so that we get so caught up or swept away by negative reactivity. Mindfulness of one's emotional experience may sound like, I'm having a feeling that I'm really overwhelmed and I'm going to continue to do the best that I can. Or this is really difficult right now. How can I comfort and care for myself in this moment? This is in opposition to self-talk that might be indicative of over-identification with emotions, like, I'm so overwhelmed right now. I'm clearly not capable of managing this. So, particularly relevant to now, in response to a trauma or in response to a stressful time, it's very easy to fall into patterns of self-pity or self-indulgence. When we stay in these spaces too long, they can become detrimental. An approach of self-compassion is something that might help us engage with this experience in a different way. For some people experiencing self-pity, their self-talk might be heavy in over-identification with emotions and with isolation. Self-compassion and taking a self-compassionate stance would encourage us to lean into the concepts of mindfulness and common humanity. That might sound like, this experience is really hard and it's part of the current human condition, a reality that's shared by all of us. When we're stressed, it's also easy to fall into patterns of self-indulgence, activities that help us feel good in the moment. That might sound like, I'm so stressed out today, so I'm going to be kind to myself and just watch TV all day or eat a quart of ice cream. This, however, is self-indulgence rather than self-compassion. And remember that being compassionate with oneself means that we anchor our actions and behaviors in a manner that nurture our long-term health and happiness. So make it a goal to stay mindful of how your current thoughts and behaviors align with those overarching values of self-care. Many people say that they might be reluctant to be self-compassionate because they're afraid that it would let them get away with anything. But research contradicts this. Self-compassion is actually associated with greater emotional resilience, with greater flexibility when faced with failure, and with more accurate self-concepts and more caring relationship behavior with others. The other great thing is that self-compassion isn't dependent on external circumstances. It's always available to us, especially when we fall flat or when we're in the middle of a pandemic. So if you like what you've heard, I'd encourage you to go to self-compassion.org for more reading, as well as a self-compassion inventory to check your own self-compassion levels, and self-compassion practices, including guided meditations and exercises. Stay tuned for more from us at the Student Counseling Center. We will continue to post videos and tips about how to navigate the challenges inherent in the changes that we're currently facing, as well as how to manage your mental health during this time. Although we're not physically on campus, we are here to support you remotely. For further information, you can always contact us at the Student Counseling Center at 410-337-6481. And to speak with a mental health counselor by phone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, whether you're on or off campus, students are invited to call our mental health line at 855-236-4278. For more resources on how to take care of yourself during this time, you can always visit the Goucher College Student Counseling Center website, where we're uploading new information on a weekly basis. Until then, stay healthy and safe, and we look forward to continuing to support you on your journey to well-being while we're remote and when we're all back on campus together. Thanks.